The colony called the planet Hearthfall because of the warm winds that came every evening. The winds smelled like copper and rain. They rolled down from the black mountains and crossed the tall plains like a tide, moving grass and glittering insects in a steady wave. When the sun set, the air turned the color of ripe oranges. The lights of the human settlement blinked on, neat and square. Beyond the fence, the wild world watched back. People said the mountains were home to monsters. They called them Thrika. Some said wolf. Some said lion. Some said dragon. The truth was in between. The Thrika were big as horses, with layered scales where fur should have been, and long tails that swept the ground like heavy ropes. Their eyes were gold and patient. Their paws ended in claws that could open a tree trunk like a book. Every colonist knew the rule. If you saw a Thrika, you went the other way. No exceptions. Dr. Elias Ward did not like that rule. He did not break it for fun. He broke it for understanding. He was a xenobiologist, broad-shouldered and careful, with gentle hands and a steady voice. He believed that even the fiercest creature made sense if you watched long enough. He believed fear was a poor lamp. It showed you only the nearest shadows. So Elias walked the perimeter at dawn and dusk. He collected shed scales, tracked paw prints in clay, and noted how the prints changed after rain. He sketched the curves of the mountains, the bend of thorn trees, the paths to water. He kept a field journal with neat, narrow writing. On the cover, he had taped a small feather that looked like a sliver of sky. The colony governor, Mara Chen, respected Elias but worried about him. "You cannot save everything," she said on a night when the winds smelled like storms. "You cannot even save most things. Your job is to keep us safe. My job is to know what can be trusted," Elias said. "Sometimes that is the same thing." A week later, Hearthfall shook. The quake began as a hum in the cups on Elias's desk. The hum turned into a growl. The ground rolled under the buildings like the sea under a raft. Screws squealed, solar towers shivered and clanged like bells. People stumbled out of homes with their shoes in their hands. The sound came from the mountains, deep and heavy like stone cracking its knuckles. When it ended, dust hung in the air all the way to the horizon. Alarms sounded. Work crews ran to check water lines and the fence. Drones lifted to inspect tower joints. The medical bay opened its doors like a mouth. No one was badly hurt, but a rock slide had scarred the nearest ridge. The ridge was where Elias often saw signs of Thrika dens. He took a breath and another. He knew what he would say even before the governor called him. "You're not going," Mara said, standing in the shadow of the operations mast. "It's unstable, and if the Thrika are displaced, they'll be angry. We cannot risk a panic. If the dens collapsed, cubs might be trapped," Elias said. "Adults might be frantic, not angry. If we help, they will move away from the settlement to safer ground. If we do nothing, they will come to us anyway because we are the only lights and the only noise. I'll go alone, quiet. No drones. No guns. You'll take a beacon," Mara said. "And you will keep your channel open." He nodded. He packed a small kit: cutting torch, medjol, a sling, 2 water packs, nutrient bars, and a heat foil blanket. He tucked his field journal in the side pocket. He wore soft boots and dull colors. At the gate, the guard, a young man named Ivo, stopped him. "Doc," Ivo said, not unkind. "You're brave, but brave is not the same as safe." "I know," Elias said. He smiled like a promise he would keep if he could. "I will be careful." The path to the ridge passed through grass as tall as his chest, silver blue and whispering. Birds with mirror wings flickered above him. In the quake's wake, the world felt hushed like a room after an argument. Elias moved steady and slow. He listened the way a doctor listens to a heart. He listened for patterns: the wind, the rub of grass, the new sound, stone still slipping somewhere far off like a breath through teeth. At the base of the ridge, he saw it. A fan of fresh rock, sharp and pale, spread across the slope like spilled bones. Thorn trees lay broken. A thin sound threaded through the crash field. It rose and fell, thin as wire but steady. A cry. He climbed. He tested every foothold before he trusted it. Twice he slid, catching himself with hands and knees that would bloom bruises later. The cry guided him to a shelf where the slide had jammed a boulder against another. In the shadow of that lean-to of stone, a small shape trembled. It was a Thrika cub. Its scales were still soft, glossy like wet clay. One back leg was pinned under a flat chunk of rock. Its eyes were open, wide, gold like coins in water. When it saw Elias, its throat flickered with a warning trill, but it did not lunge. It could not. Elias crouched, slow. He kept his hands open, palms forward, not reaching yet. He spoke in a low voice that was almost a hum. "I see you," he said. "You are hurt. I will help." He did not know if the cub understood the words, but he trusted the tone. He had learned long ago that tone spoke older languages than speech. He slid the cutting torch from his pack. The cub tensed. Elias waited. The cub's breath buzzed fast, then steadied. Elias set the torch to a low line and cut a wedge from the rock trapping the leg. He cut, paused, listened. He smelled hot mineral and dust. When the rock loosened, he eased it aside with both hands. The cub yelped once and kicked free. Then it curled the leg under its body, panting, uncertain. "Let me look," Elias whispered. He scooped Megal onto his fingers. The cub watched his hands. It did not snap. He touched the joint gently. The skin was swollen but not broken. The joint held. He wrapped the leg with a strip of heat foil, binding it snug without pressure. The cub's breath slowed. It blinked in that slow, heavy way that meant the pain had stepped back a little. A shadow fell across them. Elias knew that shadow before he looked up. He felt it in the way the air pressed close, quiet and deep. The mother, Thrika, stood at the edge of the slide, as silent as a falling star. She was larger than any he had ever seen, thick through the shoulders, scale plates edged with soot gray. Her head was a sculpted wedge, her eyes bright as spilled fire. She stepped once and small stones groaned under her weight. Elias's heart thudded. He did not rise. He kept his hands low. The torch lay off to his right, dead and cold. The mother's eyes flicked to it, then back to his face. She tasted the air with a breath that seemed to pull the world into her chest. "I helped your child," Elias said softly, because he did not know what else to do except tell the truth. "I am leaving now." He backed away on the slope, careful not to trip, careful to remain facing her without staring into her eyes. The mother lowered her head and touched the wrapped leg with the side of her muzzle. The cub made a little cooing sound that Elias had not heard before, tender and high. The mother's gaze followed Elias as he retreated to the edge of the slide. He could have turned then. He did not. He waited until the mother's attention shifted fully to her cub. Then he moved down the slope, each step lighter than the last. Only when he reached the plain did he let his breath rush out of him. His hands shook. He laughed once, surprised by the sound. Back at the colony, the news moved faster than wind. Some people stared. Some clapped him on the shoulder. A few spoke the word reckless under their breath as if it tasted bad. Governor Mara met him outside the med bay with a cup of water and a look that was 3 parts relief and 1 part scold. "You were right," she said, "and you were very lucky." "I don't think it was luck," Elias said. "I think she made a choice." That night the winds came warm across the fence. Elias sat at his small desk and wrote the day into his journal. He wrote about the cry, the shape of the wound, the way the mother had looked not at his body but at his hands. He drew the wrapping pattern and the angle of the lean-to rock. He wrote, "Pain changes the story a creature tells itself about strangers." Then he stopped writing because a voice sounded at the outer gate. "Doc." It was Ivo the guard. His tone was not alarm, but it was tight. "You should see this," Elias went. People had gathered, keeping a respectful distance from the fence. The floodlights painted everything white-blue. Beyond the fence in the grass, eyes shone like fallen stars. 1 pair, 2, 5, then more. A dozen gold moons in the dark. Thrika. They were not crouched to spring. They were sitting, tails curled, ears forward. Their bodies were stone still except for the slow movement of breath. In front of them, halfway between the fence and the first row of thorn trees, a small shape wobbled. A cub. It wore a strip of silver heat foil around a back leg. Rel, Elias thought suddenly, and then blinked at himself because he had not meant to name the creature. Yet the name had waited for him anyway. The mother from the ridge stood to the left of the cub. She looked at the fence, then past it, eyes seeking. When she found Elias in the knot of humans, her head lifted a finger's width. It was not quite a nod. It felt like a question. "She's brought it to us?" Ivo whispered. "Why?" Elias did not answer. He stepped forward to the line painted 10 meters from the fence, the line no one crossed without permission. He stopped at the paint. He let his hands hang open at his sides. The mother rose, slow and deliberate, and came closer. The other adults did not move. The cub limped beside her. When they reached the fence, the mother stopped just outside the perimeter where the electric hum buzzed faintly. She lowered her head. The cub imitated her. They waited. The next morning began with mist. It rolled across the plains like a pale sea, blurring the fences and softening the lights of the colony. Elias walked the perimeter slowly, his journal tucked under his arm. He felt the air heavy on his skin, as if the whole planet was waiting. Beyond the mist, faint glimmers of gold eyes shone, scattered like lanterns. The Thrika had returned, and not just one pack, several. They were patient, silent, watching. Governor Mara Chen joined him at the outer gate. Her face was tight from lack of sleep, but her voice was steady. "They came back," she said. "They will keep coming," Elias replied. "Not to harm us, but because they made a choice." Mara gave him a sideways look. "You are still sure of that?" "More than ever," Elias said. He glanced at the golden eyes in the mist. Predators do not give away their cubs lightly. They trust only what has proven itself. They trust us now. The question is, can we prove worthy? Teaching the cubs, the trial began with caution. Each day, a few cubs were guided along the fence while adults watched. Elias and a small team whistled signals, showed paths, and used soft cloth ropes to guide movements. The cubs were curious, playful, sometimes stubborn. They bit at the ropes and pounced on shadows. But they learned. One cub, Rel, the one with the wrapped leg, became bold. He walked ahead of the others, ears twitching at Elias's whistles, tail flicking like a banner. When Rel obeyed the turn-back note and circled neatly, the other cubs copied him. Elias wrote in his journal, "One learns, many follow. A chain of trust is born from the smallest link." At night, the adults returned to the plains. They did not attack the fence. They sat in quiet ranks, eyes bright as if standing guard. People in the colony began to relax. Children pressed faces to windows, whispering about the cubs at the fence. Fear turned slowly into fascination. Still, not all colonists were convinced. Miners grumbled that food was already scarce. Farmers worried about livestock. A few argued that predators should never be near humans. "Today it's trust," one said. "Tomorrow hunger, and hunger has no memory." Elias listened, but he also saw what they did not. He saw that the adults never came close unless cubs were with them. He saw the way they moved back when whistles called the cubs away. These were not beasts circling prey. These were guardians testing the edges of a new story. The greater danger. The real test came weeks later. It began with smoke. Not colony smoke, but something darker, drifting from the far ridge. Drones sent to scout returned with blurred images. Ships landed on the plains, tall spiked silhouettes moving between them. The Vrashdot raiders, cold-blooded scavengers from beyond Hearthfall's system. They had attacked other colonies before, leaving ruin behind. Now they had found Hearthfall. Panic rippled through the settlement. Governor Mara ordered defenses ready. Towers were armed, shields checked, rifles distributed. But everyone knew. Hearthfall was small, fragile, still building itself. Against raiders, the odds were grim. That night, the Thrika gathered again at the fence. Dozens of golden eyes burned in the dark. The colonists tightened grips on weapons, but the predators did not move closer. Instead, they made a low sound, a rumble that spread through the grass like thunder underfoot. Elias stepped forward. "They know," he said softly. "They smell the strangers. They hear the ships. They understand the threat." Governor Mara's voice was sharp. "And what do you suggest? That we invite monsters inside our walls?" Elias shook his head. "Not monsters, allies. Look at them. Every night they've guarded the plains. Not against us, but against something else. They have been waiting for this." The governor hesitated. The colonists whispered. And then, from beyond the fence, one of the mothers pushed a cub forward. Rel. The cub pressed his head against the mesh, looking at Elias with bright eyes. Behind him, the adults raised their muzzles as one and gave a sound that shook the ground. A war call, not directed at humans, but outward toward the distant ridge. "They offer their strength," Elias said. His heart pounded. "The question is if we will stand with them." The battle for Hearthfall. When the raiders came, they came fast. Vrash skimmers skimmed the plains, cutting through grass with engines that screamed like knives. Firebolts cracked the air. Colonists fired back from towers. The fence shone bright with energy fields, but the raiders were many, far more than Hearthfall could match alone. Then the Thrika struck. They poured from the mist like living storms, scales flashing, tails lashing. They hit the raider lines with the force of falling mountains. Skimmers toppled. Raiders screamed as claws ripped through their ranks. Elias stood with the colonists at the perimeter, guiding cubs back behind the fence while adults surged forward. Whistles cut through the chaos. Turn back, circle. Cub after cub obeyed, moving into safe paths while their parents tore into the enemy. The colonists watched in stunned disbelief. Predators that had once been nightmares now fought as shields. One mother leapt onto a raider transport, ripping the hatch away with her teeth. Another barreled through a squad, scattering them like leaves. Still, the raiders pressed hard. Firebolt struck the fence, flaring bright. A tower cracked under the impact of heavy fire. Elias saw Mara on the rampart shouting orders, rifle blazing. Smoke stung the air, thick and bitter. Then Rel did something no one expected. The cub, limping but determined, squeezed through the hatch Elias had used before. He ran into the field of battle, ignoring whistles, ignoring shouts. His small body darted between raider boots, snapping at ankles, distracting enemies who aimed at the colony walls. One shot hissed past him, grazing his flank, but he did not stop. The mother from the ridge roared and charged to shield him, her body a wall of fury. Together, mother and cub drove the raiders back long enough for the colonists to regroup. It was the first time humans and Thrika truly fought side by side. And it was enough. When dawn came, the raiders fled, leaving wrecks smoking on the plains. The Thrika chased them to the ridge and stopped, not crossing farther. They returned to the colony's edge, silent once more. A new understanding. The field after battle was quiet except for wind. Bodies of raiders lay scattered. Smoke rose in thin lines. Colonists moved among the wreckage, helping the wounded. Elias found Rel near the fence, his flank scorched but alive. He knelt, hand steady, and wrapped the wound with Megel. Rel pressed his head into Elias's chest with a soft sound, tired but trusting. The mother stood close, watching. She lowered her head until her muzzle brushed Elias's shoulder, a gesture so deliberate it felt ceremonial. Around them, colonists stared, weapons lowered, fear melting into awe. Governor Mara approached. Her uniform was scorched, her face streaked with ash, but her eyes were clear. "You were right," she said quietly. "They chose us, and we chose them." Elias nodded. "Trust is not given freely. It is earned. And today we earned each other." The legacy in the weeks that followed, the colony changed. The cubs continued to visit the fence, learning signals, learning paths. Farmers marked corridors through their fields where Thrika moved freely, leaving livestock untouched. Children grew up seeing predators not as monsters but as neighbors. The adults still stayed outside, but they lingered near the settlement at night, their eyes shining like watchfires. When raiders returned months later, they did not dare approach the colony. Scouts reported seeing predators patrolling the plains, keeping intruders far from human walls. Elias kept writing in his journal. His final entry of the season read, "Predators understand survival. They understand strength. But they understand something rarer too. They understand guardianship. We call it compassion. They call it instinct. But whatever the name, it binds us together. On Hearthfall, the fiercest claws trust the gentlest hands. And that is why we will endure." He closed the book and looked out at the plains where Rel limped proudly beside his mother, golden eyes bright in the setting sun. The wind carried their low song, deep and steady, blending with the hum of the colony's towers. It was not the sound of fear. It was the sound of a new story, one written by humans and predators together.